The mess hall of the Galactic Coalition warship Stellar Dawn buzzed with the usual evening chatter. Dozens of alien species sat together at long metal tables, eating their varied meals and sharing stories from their homeworlds. The air smelled of different foods and the recycled atmosphere that all spaceships carried. In the corner, three young alien soldiers huddled around a small data tablet, their voices growing louder with each passing minute. Zeph, a tall crystalline being from the Veil 3 homeworld, held the tablet in his four-fingered hands. His body sparkled like cut glass under the bright lights, and his voice had a musical quality that made other species stop to listen. "Listen to this one," Zeph said, his crystal face shifting colors as he laughed. "There was once a human warrior, named Achilles, who could not be killed except for one spot on his heel. His mother dipped him in magic water as a baby, but she held him by the heel, so that part stayed normal." Crix, a scaled reptilian with yellow eyes and sharp teeth, slammed his clawed hand on the table. "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Magic water? Why would any species believe such nonsense?" The third member of their group, Naira, used 2 of her 6 arms to cover her mouth while she giggled. Her people, the Helixians, were known for their grace and intelligence, but even she found the human stories ridiculous. How can they think one warrior could change a whole war? Wars are won by technology, strategy, and numbers, not by one person with magic protection. Zeph scrolled through more files on the tablet. "Oh, here is another good one. A human called Beowulf who fought monsters with his bare hands. It says he ripped the arm off a creature called Grendel and then killed Grendel's mother too. Then, when he was old, he fought a dragon and died but killed it at the same time." "Dragons?" Crix hissed, shaking his head. "They believe in dragons, flying lizards that breathe fire. My people are reptiles, and I can tell you that breathing fire is impossible. The internal heat would kill us." "But wait," Nira said, taking the tablet with her upper arms while her lower arms gestured excitedly. "There are more. Look at this database section called Norse mythology. They have gods who fight with hammers and axes. This one called Thor has a hammer that always comes back to his hand when he throws it." The 3 aliens burst into laughter. Other species in the mess hall turned to look at them, wondering what was so funny. Some moved closer to listen, curious about what had caught their attention. "And here," Zeph continued, "they have stories about cowboys who could shoot so well they could hit a coin thrown in the air. All soldiers who never retreated from any battle, no matter how many enemies they faced." "Primitive thinking," Crix said, his voice full of scorn. "They make up these stories because they know they are weak. In real battles, humans have some of the highest casualty rates in the coalition forces. They die easily and often." At a table 20 feet away, Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat alone, slowly eating his meal. He was a human in his early 30s, with short brown hair and calm blue eyes. His uniform was clean and pressed, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen combat. He did not look up from his food, but his jaw tightened slightly as he listened to the aliens mock his species. Jake had been assigned to the Stellar Dawn for 6 months now. He worked hard, followed orders, and got along well with most of the crew. But he had learned to keep quiet when other species talked about humans. It usually went better that way. "Look at this," Naira said, her voice carrying across the mess hall. "They have a whole section about King Arthur and his knights. Supposedly, this Arthur pulled a sword from a stone, and only he could do it because he was the rightful king. Then he and his knights sat at a round table and went on quests to find a magic cup." "A magic cup," Crix repeated, his yellow eyes bright with amusement. "Not advanced technology or superior weapons. A magic cup?" More aliens had gathered around their table now, drawn by the laughter and the strange stories. A group of Zephyrians, tall gray beings with large black eyes, listened with interest. Some Aquarians, blue-skinned humanoids from the water worlds, had also joined the crowd. "The best part," Zeph said, "is that humans still tell these stories to their children. They actually teach their young ones to believe in magic and heroes who can do impossible things. No wonder they perform so poorly in real combat situations." Jake's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully and looked up for the first time. His blue eyes found the group of aliens and he studied them quietly. They were young, he realized. Probably on their first deep space assignment, full of confidence and eager to prove themselves. "Hey," Crix called out, noticing Jake's attention. "Human, you are human, yes?" Jake nodded slowly. "I am." "Come here, we want to ask you something." The mess hall grew quieter as more beings turned to watch. Jake hesitated for a moment, then stood and walked over to the group. He was not as tall as Zeph, but he moved with a steady grace that made some of the older aliens take notice. "Do you believe these stories?" Nera asked, holding up the tablet. "Do you think your ancestors really fought dragons and monsters?" Jake looked at the tablet, then at the faces surrounding him. He could see the amusement in their eyes, the way they were barely holding back laughter. "Which stories?" "All of them," Zeph said. "The warriors who could not be killed, the gods with magic hammers, the knights who went on impossible quests." "Do you really think those things happened?" "Or maybe," Crix added with a grin that showed his sharp teeth, "you think you have the blood of heroes running through your veins? Maybe you think you could pull a sword from a stone or kill a dragon with your bare hands?" The crowd of aliens waited for Jake's answer. Some looked curious, others amused. A few seemed almost sympathetic, as if they felt sorry for him being put on the spot. Jake was quiet for a long moment. He looked at each of the young aliens in turn, then at the crowd that had gathered. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. "I think every species has stories about their past," he said. "Stories about heroes and battles and impossible things. Maybe some of them are true, maybe some are not. But people tell them for a reason." "The reason," Crix said, "is that humans cannot accept reality." "You make up fantasies because the truth is too hard to face." "What truth is that?" Jake asked. "You are weak," Zeph said simply. "That individual warriors cannot change the course of battles. That magic does not exist, and heroes are just normal people who got lucky and survived long enough for someone to write a story about them." The mess hall was almost silent now. Even the sounds of eating and drinking had stopped as everyone listened to the conversation. Jake felt the weight of all those eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond to the challenge. "Maybe you are right," Jake said finally. "Maybe they are just stories." The young alien smiled, satisfied that they had made their point. But something in Jake's tone made a few of the older beings in the crowd shift uncomfortably. There was a quality to his voice that did not match his words, an undercurrent that suggested he was not saying everything he was thinking. "Of course we are right," Naira said. "Humans tell these stories because you want to believe you are more than you really are. But in real combat, you die just like everyone else." "Actually, you die more often than most," Jake nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "we do die. Sometimes we die very easily." He paused, his blue eyes growing distant. "And sometimes we do not die at all, even when we should." Before anyone could ask what he meant by that, Jake turned and walked back to his table. He sat down and continued eating his meal as if nothing had happened. The crowd of aliens slowly dispersed, returning to their own conversations and meals, but Zeph, Crix, and Nera remained at their table, staring at the human database with new interest. There had been something in Jake's voice, something in the way he had said those last words, that made them want to dig deeper into human history. "Let us look at their military records," Crix suggested. "If their myths are just fantasies, then their real battles should prove it." "Good idea," Zeph agreed. "We can find actual combat reports and show everyone how ordinary human soldiers really are." None of them noticed the older alien sitting at a table near the back of the mess hall. Captain Thorne, a weathered Zephyrian with scars across his gray skin, had been watching the entire exchange. His large black eyes followed Jake as the human finished his meal and left the mess hall. Captain Thorne had been fighting in space for over 40 years. He had seen more battles than most beings could imagine, and he had learned to recognize certain things in other warriors. The way they moved, the way they spoke, the way they held themselves when they thought no one was watching. Lieutenant Jake Morrison moved like a man who had seen things that most people could not imagine. And Captain Thorne had the uncomfortable feeling that the young aliens were about to learn something they were not prepared for. The next morning, Zeph, Crix, and Naira met in the ship's computer bay before their duty shifts began. They had spent the night thinking about their conversation with Jake Morrison, and all three had the same idea. They wanted to dig deeper into human military records to prove their point about human weakness. I accessed the basic files last night, Zeph said, his crystalline body flickering with excitement. Human casualty rates are 30% higher than most coalition species in similar combat situations. They also have the shortest average lifespan in active combat zones. Crix nodded, his scales shifting from yellow to orange with satisfaction. I knew it. All those stories about mighty warriors, but the numbers do not lie. Humans die faster than anyone else. Naira used her upper arms to work at a computer terminal while her lower arms gestured as she spoke. But there are some strange things in the files, too. Some human units have casualty rates that make no sense. Either very high or very low, with no pattern. What do you mean? Zeph asked. Look at this, Naira said, pulling up a chart on the screen. Most human units lose between 20 and 40% of their soldiers in major battles. But some units lose 90% or more. And a few units lose almost no one at all, even in the worst fights. Crix leaned closer to the screen. Maybe the ones with low casualties are just cowards. They run away instead of fighting. That is what I thought too, Naira said. But the combat reports say different. The units with the lowest casualty rates also have the highest enemy kill counts. They do not run away. They kill everything that fights them. The three aliens stared at the screen in confusion. The numbers did not make sense according to what they knew about warfare and tactics. There must be an error in the data, Zeph said finally. Or maybe humans lie in their reports to make themselves look better. Let us find some specific examples, Crix suggested. Real battles with real names. Then we can show everyone how humans exaggerate their accomplishments. They spent the next 2 hours searching through military databases, looking for famous human battles. They found reports from the Siege of Titan Base, the Battle of the Void Gates, and the Defense of New Earth. Each report contained the same confusing mix of high casualties and impossible achievements. Here, Naira said, pointing to a section of text. This report says one human soldier held a corridor for 6 hours against 300 enemy troops. 300, that is impossible. Obviously, Crix agreed. No single being could fight that many enemies and survive. The human commanders must have made up the story to boost morale. But look at the signature on the report, Zeph said, reading carefully. It is signed by a Zephyrian colonel, not a human. Why would one of my people lie for humans? The question hung in the air uncomfortably. Zephyrians were known for their honesty and attention to detail. They rarely made mistakes in official reports, and they never lied to make other species look better. Maybe the Zephyrian colonel was confused, Naira suggested. Maybe he did not see what really happened. Or maybe, said a new voice behind them, you three are looking for the wrong answers. They turned to see Jake Morrison standing in the doorway of the computer bay. He was dressed in his work uniform and carried a toolkit, suggesting he was on his way to perform maintenance duties. What do you mean? Zeph asked. Jake stepped into the room and looked at the screen they had been studying. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes grew harder. You are trying to prove that humans are weak and that our stories are lies, but you are not asking the right questions. What questions should we ask? Crix demanded, his voice challenging. You should ask why human casualty rates are so different from battle to battle, Jake said quietly. You should ask why some human units lose everyone while others lose no one. You should ask what makes the difference. Fine, Naira said, crossing her arms with 4 of her 6 limbs. What makes the difference? Jake was quiet for a long moment. He looked at each of the young aliens, then at the computer screen showing battle reports and casualty statistics. Some battles, humans fight like soldiers. We use tactics and technology and teamwork, just like everyone else. We die at normal rates, and we win or lose based on numbers and strategy. And other battles? Zeph asked. Other battles, we stop fighting like soldiers, Jake said. We fight like something else. Something older. What does that mean? Crix asked, his yellow eyes narrowing. Instead of answering, Jake pointed to the screen. You found reports about one soldier holding a corridor against 300 enemies. Did you look up the name of that soldier? The three aliens exchanged glances. They had been so focused on disproving the story that they had not paid attention to the details. No, Naira admitted. We thought it was just another made-up hero story. The soldier's name is Ben Hayes, Jake said. He is a colonel now. He works in the engineering section of this ship. You can ask him yourself if the story is true. The aliens stared at Jake in shock. They had been eating meals and working alongside a living legend without knowing it. He is here? Zeph asked. On this ship? Deck 7 Engineering Bay 2, Jake said. He runs the third shift maintenance crew. Quiet man, keeps to himself. Never talks about his combat service. If he really did what the reports say, Crix said slowly, why does he not tell stories about it? Why does he work in maintenance instead of commanding troops? Jake's expression grew sad. Maybe you should ask him. But be careful how you ask. Some questions are harder to answer than others. With that, Jake left the computer bay, leaving the three aliens alone with their thoughts and their growing curiosity. Over the next few days, the aliens spent every free moment researching Ben Hayes and the battle where he had supposedly held the corridor. They found more reports, more witness statements, and more impossible claims. According to the files, Hayes had not just survived the attack. He had killed most of the 300 enemies himself, using weapons he had taken from fallen soldiers, and improvised explosives he had made from maintenance supplies. This has to be propaganda, Crix insisted during one of their research sessions. No one can kill that many trained soldiers alone. But the reports all match, Naira pointed out. Human reports, Zephyrian reports, even some from the enemy side that were captured later, they all tell the same story. Then they are all lying, Zeph said. But he sounded less certain than before. The aliens had also started watching Ben Hayes during their daily routines. They saw him in the mess hall, eating alone and reading technical manuals. They saw him in the corridors, walking with the slow, careful steps of someone who was always aware of his surroundings. They saw him in the engineering bay, working on repairs with steady hands and infinite patience. He looked like a normal human, middle-aged, graying hair, quiet manner. Nothing about him suggested he was capable of the incredible violence described in the military reports. He is just a maintenance worker, Crix said after watching Hayes repair a water recycler for 2 hours. Look at him. He is careful and slow and thinks about everything twice. That is not a warrior. Maybe that is the point, Naira said thoughtfully. Maybe real warriors do not look like the heroes in stories. Or maybe, Zeph added, the stories are still lies and we are wasting our time. But despite their doubts, the aliens found themselves drawn to Ben Hayes. They started timing their meals to match his schedule, sitting close enough to observe him but far enough away to avoid conversation. They watched how he moved, how he spoke to other crew members, how he handled tools and equipment. There was something about Hayes that did not quite fit with their image of a normal maintenance worker. He was too aware of everything around him, too careful about positioning himself near exits, too quick to notice when someone was watching him. And sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, his eyes would get a distant expression that suggested he was seeing something other than the ship's corridors. The breaking point came a week after their first conversation with Jake Morrison. The three aliens were in the mess hall, once again reading human mythology files and making jokes about impossible heroes. They had attracted a small audience of other young crew members who enjoyed hearing about the ridiculous stories humans told their children. Listen to this one, Zeph said, his voice carrying across the room. A human named Paul Bunyan who was so big he could chop down entire forests with one swing of his axe. And he had a blue ox that was as big as a mountain. At least the ox was not magic, Crick said, earning laughs from the crowd. Oh, but wait, Naira added. Here is one about a cowboy who could shoot so fast he could draw his gun and fire before his shadow could move. And he never missed even when shooting at coins thrown in the air. The laughter grew louder. Even some of the older crew members were smiling at the absurd stories. And here, Zeph continued, soldiers who could march for days without rest, who could climb mountains that no one else could climb, who could survive in conditions that would kill anyone else. They called them rangers and special forces and commandos. Fantasy soldiers, Crick said dismissively. Humans want to believe they can be better than they are, so they make up stories about super warriors who can do anything. Is that what you think? The voice came from the back of the mess hall. Everyone turned to see Ben Hayes standing near the entrance, holding a food. The mess hall remained silent after Ben Hayes spoke those last words. The young aliens stared at him, suddenly understanding that they were talking to someone who had actually lived through the battles they had been reading about. The crowd of onlookers pressed closer, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. 30 years ago, Hayes continued, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the room, I was a sergeant in the Coalition Marines. 22 years old, fresh out of training. Convinced I knew everything about warfare because I had read the manuals and practiced on simulators. He paused, looking down at his hands. They were steady now, but there were old scars across his knuckles that the aliens had never noticed before. The Korthak were pushing deep into Coalition space, Hayes said. They had better ships, better weapons, and more soldiers than we did. High Command decided to make a stand at Proxima Station. It was a mining facility built into an asteroid. With supply depots and communication arrays that the fleet needed, Naira leaned forward, her 6 arms folded carefully. We read about that battle. The report said it was a last-stand situation. That is putting it nicely, Hayes said with a bitter smile. We had 800 Coalition soldiers on that station. The Korthak brought 12,000. They wanted to capture the facility intact, so they sent boarding parties instead of just blowing us up from space. 800 against 12,000, Zeph said, his crystalline body flickering with nervous energy. Those are impossible odds. Yes, Hayes agreed. They were. We all knew we were going to die. The question was how long we could hold out before it happened. Hayes picked up his food tray and took a small bite, chewing slowly while he gathered. His thoughts, the aliens waited, afraid to interrupt. For the first 3 days we fought like soldiers, Hayes continued. We used proper tactics, coordinated our defenses, called in airstrikes when we could. We lost ground slowly but steadily. By the 4th day we were down to 300 survivors, holding the central core of the station. What happened then? Crix asked, his yellow eyes wide with interest. On the 4th day, something changed, Hayes said. The Korthak started using terror tactics. They would capture our wounded and torture them where we could hear the screams. They would send messages telling us exactly how they planned to kill us when they finally broke through our lines. The aliens around the table shifted uncomfortably. Even the warrior species among them found the idea of torture before battle disturbing. That night I was on watch in Corridor 7, Hayes said. It was supposed to be a quiet sector, just monitoring equipment and supply rooms. But the Korthak had found a maintenance tunnel we did not know about. 50 of them came through at once, trying to get behind our main defenses. 50 against 1, Naira said softly. You should have called for backup. I did call for backup, Hayes said, but the communication system was jammed. And even if it had worked, our main force was already fighting for their lives. There was no one coming to help. He set down his fork and looked directly at the 3 young aliens. So I had a choice. I could retreat and let the Korthak get behind our lines, which would mean everyone on the station would die. Or I could try to hold that corridor until backup arrived. But you were just one person, Zeph said. Yes, Hayes said. Just one person. With a standard rifle, 2 grenades, and whatever I could find in the supply rooms. The mess hall was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the ship's system seemed quieter than usual. What did you do? Crix asked. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder. I held the corridor. For how long? 6 hours? The aliens stared at him in disbelief. They had read the reports, but hearing Hayes say it himself made it seem even more impossible. How? Naira asked. How does one person fight 50 trained soldiers for 6 hours? I did not fight them like a soldier, Hayes said. I fought them like something else. What do you mean? Instead of answering directly, Hayes stood up from the table. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led the group of aliens out of the mess hall and through the ship's corridors. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Hayes moved with the same careful pace he always used, but now the aliens noticed things they had missed before. The way he checked every doorway they passed. The way he positioned himself so he could see both directions down each corridor. The way his eyes constantly scanned for threats that did not exist. They arrived at a maintenance bay that was empty except for some repair equipment and spare parts. Hayes activated a wall screen and pulled up a schematic of Proxima Station. This was Corridor 7, he said, pointing to a narrow passage on the screen. 50 meters long, with supply rooms on both sides. The Korthak came through here, at this end. I was here, at the other end. The aliens studied the schematic. It was a simple layout with no cover or defensive positions. Where did you take cover? Zeph asked. I did not take cover, Hayes said. I moved. What do you mean? Hayes touched the screen, highlighting different sections of the corridor. I turned off all the lights, complete darkness. The Korthak had night vision equipment, but it was not perfect. I knew every inch of that corridor because I had been working maintenance there for 2 weeks. But they still had you outnumbered 50. To 1, Crix pointed out. In an open battle, yes, Hayes agreed. But this was not an open battle, this was a hunting ground. He pulled up another screen showing the supply room layouts. I had access to industrial chemicals, welding equipment, electrical components, and construction materials. I also had 6 hours to prepare. Prepare what? Naira asked. Traps, Hayes said simply. Improvised explosives, acid pools, electrified barriers. Sections of corridor that could be sealed off or flooded with poison gas. The aliens began to understand. Hayes had not fought 50 soldiers in direct combat. He had turned the corridor into a maze of death traps. But the reports said you killed. Most of them in hand-to-hand combat, Zeph said. Hayes nodded grimly. The traps accounted for about half of them. The rest I had to deal with personally. How? By not fighting fair, Hayes said. By using every dirty trick I could think of. By hitting them when they could not see me coming and disappearing before they could hit back. But you were still just one person, Crix insisted. Even with traps and ambush tactics, you should not have been able to survive against that many enemies. Hayes looked at each of the aliens in turn. You are right. I should not have survived. Any reasonable person would have died in the first hour. Then how did you do it? Because I stopped being reasonable, Hayes said quietly. I stopped thinking like a civilized being and started thinking like a predator. The aliens did not understand what he meant, but something in his tone made them uncomfortable. The thing about humans, Hayes continued, is that we have not been civilized for very long. A few thousand years, maybe. Before that, we were hunters and survivors on a planet that was trying to kill us every day. We learned to be very good at killing things that were bigger and stronger than we were. That is true for most species. Naira said evolution makes everyone into survivors. No, Hayes said, shaking his head, not like humans. Most species evolved to be good at one thing. Speed or strength or intelligence or cooperation. Humans evolved to be good at everything just well enough to survive. We are not the fastest or the strongest or the smartest, but we are the most adaptable. He paused, looking at the schematic of the corridor where he had made his stand 30 years ago. And when we are pushed to the absolute limit, when everything else is stripped away, we remember what we used to be. We remember how to hunt. We remember how to kill. We remember how to survive when survival should be impossible. The myths, Zeph said suddenly. The stories about warriors who could not be defeated are not myths, Hayes finished. They are memories, genetic memories of what humans are capable of when we stop pretending to be civilized. The aliens stared at him in silence, trying to process what he had told them. "You are saying that humans can actually become superhuman in combat?" Crix asked. "I'm saying that humans can become what we really are," Hayes corrected. "We just usually choose not to." "But the casualty reports," Naira said. "Most humans die at normal rates in combat." "Because most humans fight like soldiers," Hayes explained. "They use tactics and teamwork and try to minimize casualties. They fight to win battles, not to kill enemies." "And some humans fight differently?" Hayes nodded. "Some humans stop caring about winning battles. They stop caring about tactics and casualties and objectives. They just focus on killing everything that threatens them. And those are the ones with the impossible combat records," Zeph realized. "Yes," Hayes said. "Those are the ones who survive when they should die. The ones who kill more enemies than should be possible. The ones who do things that get written up in reports that no one believes." The maintenance bay was quiet except for the hum of the ship's systems. The aliens looked at Hayes with new understanding, seeing him not as a simple maintenance worker but as something far more dangerous. "The corridor," Crix said finally. "What happened when backup finally arrived?" Hayes smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "They found me sitting in the dark, surrounded by 50 dead Korthek." The days following Ben Hayes' revelation were strange ones aboard the Stellar Dawn. Word of what had happened in the maintenance bay spread quietly through the crew. The young aliens who had been mocking human myths found themselves the subject of curious stares and whispered conversations. CEPH, Crix, and Naira tried to return to their normal duties, but they could not stop thinking about what Hayes had told them. They found themselves watching the human crew members with new eyes, wondering what each of them might be capable of if pushed to their limits. Jake Morrison noticed the change in their behavior immediately. The three aliens who had been so confident and mocking just a week ago now seemed nervous and uncertain. They still sat together at meals, but their conversations were quieter, and they no longer made jokes about human stories. "You talk too?" "Hayes," Jake said one evening, joining them at their table in the mess hall. It was not a question. "Yes," Zeph said, his crystalline body flickering with uncomfortable colors. "He told us about Proxima Station." "And now you want to know if his story is true," Jake said, settling into his chair. "Is it?" Crix asked, his yellow eyes searching Jake's face for answers. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering how to respond. "What do you think?" "I think," Naira said slowly, using two arms to gesture while the other four remained folded, "that we did not understand what we were reading in those military reports." "What do you mean?" "The casualty rates," she continued. "The impossible combat records. We thought they were lies or mistakes. But if Hayes is telling the truth, then maybe they are just different kinds of battles." "Different how?" Jake asked. "Some battles where humans fight like soldiers," Zeph said, "using tactics and teamwork and trying to minimize losses. Those are the battles with normal casualty rates. And other battles where humans fight like something else," Crix added. "Where they stop caring about anything except killing their enemies. Those are the battles with impossible records." Jake nodded slowly. "You are learning." "But we still do not understand something," Naira said. "If humans can become these super warriors, why do you not do it all the time? Why do you ever fight? Like normal soldiers?" The question hung in the air between them. Jake looked around the mess hall, watching other crew members eating and talking and going about their daily lives. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "Because the cost is too high," he said finally. "What cost?" "Hayes told you about surviving that corridor for 6 hours, Jake said. "Did he tell you what happened after the battle was over?" The three aliens shook their heads. "He spent 2 months in a medical facility," Jake continued. "Not because of physical injuries, but because he could not remember how to be human again. He would attack doctors who tried to help him. He could not sleep because he was always listening for enemies. He could not eat in the mess hall because he needed to sit with his back to the wall and watch every person who came near him. Post-combat stress, Zeph said. Many species experience that after difficult battles. This was different, Jake sighed. Hayes had not just survived a battle. He had become something that was not meant to exist in civilized society. It took months of therapy and medication to bring him back to normal. Is that why he works in maintenance now? Nira asked. Instead of leading troops? Partly, Jake said. But also because once you have gone that far, once you have become what Hayes became, you understand something about yourself that you cannot forget. You know that the civilized person you pretend to be is just a mask, and you know that the mask can come off again. The aliens sat in uncomfortable silence, trying to process what Jake was telling them. So humans can become these super warriors? Crick said slowly, but doing so damages them permanently. Not always permanently, Jake corrected, but always significantly. And the more often it happens, the harder it becomes to come back. Have you ever ... Zeph started, then stopped. Have I ever what? Jake asked. Have you ever become like Hayes? In battle? Jake stared at his food tray for a long moment. When he looked up, his blue eyes had a distant quality that the aliens had never seen before. Once, he said quietly, during the defense of Kepler Station. I was a corporal then, leading a squad of 12 soldiers. We were supposed to evacuate civilians from a residential sector. What happened? The hegemony forces arrived faster than expected, Jake said. They started killing civilians before we could get them out. Women, children, elderly people. They were not soldiers, just families trying to escape. His voice became harder as he continued. My squad was supposed to fall back and regroup with the main force. Standard procedure when facing superior numbers. But I could not leave those people to die. So you stayed to fight? I stayed to kill, Jake corrected. For 3 hours, I hunted hegemony soldiers through those residential corridors. I did not use tactics or strategy. I just killed them, one by one, until there were no more left to kill. How many were there? 87, Jake said without hesitation. I counted. The aliens stared at him in shock. Jake Morrison, the quiet, polite human they had known for months, had single-handedly killed nearly 100 enemy soldiers. What happened to your squad? Nira asked. They followed me, Jake said. At first they tried to convince me to retreat. But when they saw what I was doing, when they saw that it was working, they started fighting the same way. By the end of the battle, all 12 of us had become something else. Did you save the civilians? Yes, Jake said. We saved them. But we also became something that terrified them. When the evacuation ships arrived, the civilians were more afraid of us than they had been of the enemy. Because you had become predators, Zeph said, understanding. Exactly. And once you become a predator, it is very hard to convince prey that you are safe to be around. Jake pushed his food tray away, no longer hungry. That is why humans do not become warriors like Hayes very often. Because when we do, we lose something important. We lose the ability to be trusted by the people we are trying to protect. But you seem normal now, Crix observed. You work with the crew, you follow orders, you do not act like a predator. Because I learned to control it, Jake said. With help from Hayes, actually. He taught me how to keep that part of myself locked away. Hayes helped you? Yes, he has helped a lot of human soldiers over the years. He understands what it is like to carry that kind of darkness inside you. The aliens began to understand why Hayes worked in maintenance instead of commanding troops. He was not just a maintenance worker. He was also a healer, helping other humans deal with the aftermath of becoming monsters. How many humans have done this? Naira asked. Become these predator warriors? More than you might think, Jake said. Less than you might fear. The military keeps careful records, but they do not like to talk about it. They call it extreme combat response in the official reports. And the stories? The myths about heroes and warriors are about humans who went through this transformation and somehow managed to come back, Jake said. The ones who became monsters and then found their way back to being human again. So they are real? The heroes are real, Jake said. But they are not the perfect warriors from the stories. They are broken people who did terrible things because they had to, and then spent the rest of their lives trying to make up for it. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Thorne, the old Zephyrian veteran who had been watching their interactions for days. He approached their table with the slow, careful movements of someone who had seen too many battles. "Lieutenant Morrison," Thorne said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command. "May I speak with you privately?" Jake looked up at the captain, then at the three young aliens. "Actually, sir, I think they should hear this too. They have been asking questions about human combat capabilities." Thorne's large black eyes studied the aliens for a moment before he nodded. "Very well, I have been listening to the rumors about your conversation with Colonel Hayes. I think it is time you understood something about the broader implications of what you have learned." He sat down at their table, his scarred gray skin reflecting the mess hall lights. "I have been fighting alongside humans for 40 years, he said. "I have seen them in normal combat situations, and I have seen them in extreme situations. What Hayes and Morrison have told you is accurate, but incomplete." "What do you mean?" Zeph asked. "They have told you about individual humans becoming predators," Thorne said. "But they have not told you about what happens when entire human units undergo this transformation at the same time." The aliens felt a chill run through them. The idea of one human becoming a super warrior was frightening enough. The idea of hundreds or thousands of them doing it together was terrifying. "Has that ever happened?" Crix asked. "Twice," Thorne said. "Once during the siege of Terra Nova, and once during the Battle of the Shattered Rings. Both times, human casualties were nearly zero. Enemy casualties were total." "Total?" Nira asked. "Complete annihilation?" Thorne said grimly. "No survivors, no prisoners, no retreat. The humans did not stop killing until there were no more enemies left to kill." "What caused it?" "In both cases, the enemy had committed atrocities against human civilians," Thorne said. "They had crossed a line that made it impossible for the humans to fight as soldiers, so they fought as something else." "And after the battles?" The following morning, Zeph, Crix, and Nira found themselves back in the computer bay where their journey had begun. But this time, they were not looking for evidence to mock human stories. They were searching for understanding. "Look at this," Nira said, pointing to a file on the screen. "These are psychological evaluation reports from human soldiers who have undergone extreme combat response." Crix read over her shoulder. "They all say similar things. Memory gaps during combat. Feeling like they were watching someone else fight. Inability to explain how they did what they did." "And look at the medical scans," Zeph added, his crystalline body flickering with nervous energy. "Their brain activity changes during these episodes. The parts that control fear and rational thinking shut down almost completely, while the parts that control instinct and aggression become hyperactive," Nira continued. "It is like they become different people entirely." The three aliens had spent hours reading through classified military files that Captain Thorne had given them access to. What they found was a pattern that appeared throughout human military history, going back centuries. "There are reports here from before humans even had space travel," Crix said, scrolling through older files. "Soldiers who fought impossible battles and won. Warriors who held positions that should have been overrun. Individuals who defeated entire armies. And the descriptions are always the same," Zeph noted. "They stopped thinking like normal people and started fighting like wild animals. But somehow they managed to keep enough intelligence to use tactics and weapons." "The perfect combination," Nira said quietly. "Animal instincts with human intelligence." The door to the computer bay opened and Ben Hayes entered. He looked tired, as if he had not slept well. The three aliens had been avoiding him since their conversation in the maintenance bay, unsure how to face someone who had revealed such dark truths about himself. "Captain Thorne told me you were researching human combat psychology," Hayes said, settling into a chair across from them. "Finding anything interesting?" "Too much," Zeph said honestly. "We thought we were just proving that human myths were fantasies. Instead, we discovered that they are historical records." "And now you are scared of us," Hayes observed. "It was not a question," Should we be? Crix asked. Hayes considered the question seriously. Yes and no. You should be scared of what we can become. But you should not be scared of what we choose to be. What do you mean? Every day, every human in this fleet makes a choice, Hayes said. We choose to be civilized. We choose to follow rules and work together and treat other species with respect. We choose to be the people you thought we were before you learned the truth. But you could choose differently, Nira said. Yes, Hayes agreed. We could, but we do not want to. That is the difference between humans and most other predator species. We remember what it feels like to be monsters, and we do not like it. Even though it makes you incredibly powerful in combat? Especially because it makes us powerful, Hayes said. Power without control is just destruction. And we have seen what happens when we lose control. Jake Morrison entered the computer bay, carrying a data pad. I thought I might find you here, he said to the aliens. Still trying to understand human nature? We are trying to understand why you told us the truth, Zeph said. You could have let us keep believing that human stories were myths. Why did you reveal what you really are? Jake sat down next to Hayes, because lies have consequences. If you had kept believing that humans were weak and our stories were fantasies, someday you might have made a mistake based on that belief. What kind of mistake? The kind that gets people killed, Hayes said grimly. If you were ever in command of human troops, you might have put us in situations where we would have no choice but to become what we really are. You mean situations where you would transform into predators? Exactly. And once that happens, it is very hard to predict what will happen next. Jake activated his datapad and showed them a file. This is a report from the Battle of Kepler Station, where I had my own transformation. After the battle, Command spent months analyzing what went wrong. What did they find? Crix asked. That the human units had been given impossible orders. Jake said, we were told to hold positions that could not be held, to protect civilians while also engaging superior enemy forces. The commanders did not understand that pushing humans too far would trigger something they could not control. So they changed their tactics? Naira asked. Yes, Hayes said. Now human units are never given missions that might require extreme combat response. We are never put in situations where we might have to choose between following orders and protecting innocent lives. Because you cannot trust yourselves to stop once you start killing, Zeph said. Because we love our families and friends too much to risk becoming something they would fear, Jake corrected. The aliens sat quietly, processing this new information. They were beginning to understand that the truth about human nature was more complex than they had first thought. Can I ask you something? Naira said finally. When you transform into these predator warriors, do you enjoy it? Hayes and Jake exchanged glances. It was clearly a question they had hoped would not be asked. Yes, Hayes said finally. That is the most terrifying part. When it happens, it feels good. It feels right. Like we are finally being what we were meant to be, and when it ends? When it ends, we remember what we did and we are horrified, Jake said. We remember enjoying the killing and we hate ourselves for it. That is why we tell stories about heroes, Hayes continued. Real heroes are not people who never feel the urge to do terrible things. Real heroes are people who feel that urge and choose to resist it. Like the myths about warriors who gave up their power, Zeph said, understanding dawning in his crystalline features. Exactly, stories about Achilles choosing to die rather than live as a monster. Stories about Beowulf sacrificing himself to save others. Stories about knights who laid down their swords when the fighting was done. Those are not stories about being strong, Crix realized. Those are stories about being strong enough to choose weakness. Now you understand, Jake said. Human myths are not about becoming powerful. They are about becoming powerful and then choosing to use that power responsibly. Captain Thorne entered the computer bay, followed by several other senior officers. From different species? The aliens recognized some of them as the ship's command staff. I hope you do not mind the interruption, Thorne said. But word of your conversations has spread through the senior staff. Many of us have been wondering when younger crew members would discover the truth about human nature. You knew we would find out eventually? Naira asked. It was inevitable, said Commander Vex, a tall blue-skinned Aquarian. Young officers always question what they are told, and human combat records are too unusual to ignore forever. The question, added Major Krill, a stocky Dwarian with metallic skin, is what you will do with this knowledge. What do you mean? Zeph asked. You now know that the humans in your unit are capable of things that most species cannot imagine, Thorn said. You know that they choose every day not to be what they could be? How does that change how you work? With them, the three young aliens looked at each other, then at the human officers in the room. Jake Morrison and Ben Hayes watched them quietly, waiting to see how they would respond. I think, Zeph said slowly, that it makes me respect them more, not less. Why? Commander Vex asked. Because, Crick said, anyone can be civilized when being civilized is easy. But choosing to be civilized when you could be a god of war, that takes real strength. And it means that when humans choose to fight alongside us, Nira added, they are not just offering their skills as soldiers. They are offering to risk becoming something they fear in order to protect us. That is the real human myth, Hayes said quietly. Not that we are heroes because we can kill our enemies, but that we are heroes because we can choose not to kill our enemies even when killing them would be easier. And when you do choose to kill, Major Krill asked, then we make sure it is for the right reasons, Jake said. And we make sure we find our way back to being human again. The senior officers nodded approvingly. This was the lesson they had hoped the young aliens would learn. There is one more thing you should know, Thorn said. Every species in the Coalition has dangerous capabilities that they choose not to use. Humans are not unique in having a dark side to their nature. What do you mean? Zeph asked. Zephyrians could use our telepathic abilities to control other minds, Thorn said. Aquarians could use their chemical knowledge to create plagues that would wipe out entire worlds. Dwarians could use their technology to build weapons that would destroy solar systems. But you choose not to, Naira said. We all choose not to, Commander Vex confirmed. That is what makes us worthy of being part of the Coalition. Not our strengths, but our restraint. Humans just happen to be more dramatic about it. Major Krill added with what might have been a smile. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this final lesson. The myths and stories that every species told were not just entertainment. They were reminders of what they could become and warnings about what they must never become. So what happens now? Crix asked. Now you go back to your duties, Jake said. You work alongside humans just like you.